Hello, with me today is Meeta Gangrade. She is the Chief Digital and Operating Officer at One-to-One Help. Today we will be exploring how digital transformation can be revolutionary in the EAP space. Thank you, Meeta, so much for joining us.
Hi Rahi, thanks and pleasure to be here.
So Meeta, what is the business case for digital transformation?
So actually I'd like to start off with a very controversial thought process that there is no business case, it is the business today. In fact, you might be a company that has been existing for a long time, or you could be a new company, but digital is at the core of everything that you do today. So in fact, I think this phrase called digital transformation has also become obsolete because most companies actually need to get on this journey sooner rather than later. And it's not a one-time thing, it's something that you'll have to keep doing constantly.
Okay. So where do companies usually falter when attempting to transform themselves?
That's actually a good question, Rahi, but I think transformation is never easy, or change has never been easy for humankind, because you can have technology, you can get in platforms, you can look at a different part of your business, but one of the toughest things to do in transformation is driving the change in people culture. Be it your customers, right? They're used to seeing you in a particular way, they're used to your service in a particular fashion. Overnight, if you try to do something very different, uh, it is something that comes in the way is usually the human behaviors in this whole chain, in the change. But the second biggest impediment or the failures that come in is the vision in the company, the acceptance to change within a company. A lot of people are very fixated on the idea in the way that they were doing things because they have got success out of it, and that's proven to work, in the past couple of times. However, they may not actually realize that not making a change might make them actually non-existential. So to take an example, most hotel industries were very comfortable doing business the way they used to do it until one fine day booking.com came in and actually ate into 30% of the margin of most hoteliers, because now they own the consumer. Netflix disrupted the way we watched content. And if you look at it, Netflix actually went over 3 rounds of transformation. They actually started by distributing DVDs, then they moved into the business of distributing content, and now they're actually in the business of publishing content, right? But in order to make these changes, if the teams they had, the people they had, and the consumer that they went to were also fixated on getting things in a particular way, it would have actually come in a big way. And wherever I've worked with large companies, I've seen that the culture, the leadership, and the lack of the ability to be flexible and change has come in the biggest way of transformation.
So, since you have already pointed out that it's mostly the culture which needs to change first, could you also share a framework that you can use to make sense of emerging technologies and harnessing their abilities?
Sure. So actually, I would say that there is a constant exercise that a company needs to do across 5 to 6 pillars. The first pillar is to really get to understand what business are you really in, right? And questioning that business from a 360-degree perspective. So to give you an example, we as an EAP provider could have very well thought that we are in the business of delivering counseling services. But I think the bigger question that we asked ourselves is, what problems are we really solving today? And the first answer was that I think we're here to take care and make sure emotional well being is available to everybody on earth. And people should be able to take care of their emotions and their well being just as well as they take care of their health. Now, while this is a very subtle shift, it completely changes the way that you think about how you're going to give that. Uh, the why of your business is very important as a first step. Once you set up the why, one of the mistakes people do is they always believe that you need to spend humongous amounts of time trying to create the most perfect blueprint, the most perfect architecture, and things around that, right? And of course, when you try to give you an example, let's say in order to be able to deliver emotional well-being for all, it's important to understand how do you fit yourself in the lives of your consumers, right? Versus trying to be fixated with technologies you knew and the ways that you did it in the past. So most people today believe in the emerging technology that you need to have a chatbot, you need to do something with AI, you need to have blockchain, and these are all buzzwords that everybody wants to leverage without really understanding the beauty of some of these technologies and the relevance of them in the business that you're in. So just because I'm in the business of emotional well-being and I want to become a digital company, it doesn't mean I need to do something with blockchain. I need to do something with blockchain because blockchain as a technology will unleash something completely different for me, right? So the next part is really to figure out the core capabilities that you need within the organization, and don't design it to depth. Just put the boxes around what are the big capabilities that will help you get there. The third step would be to figure out how are you going to fulfill these capabilities. Are you going to do it yourself? Are you going to partner with somebody? Are you going to deliver it using readily available technology platforms or SaaS solutions that are there? And I think you have to be willing to collaborate and work with newer paradigms of how to deliver this to your consumers. But at the heart of all of this would be experience design. So you need to have a discipline of looking at the experience that you're going to deliver, and therefore, given that experience, what are the kinds of technologies that make sense? And many a times things don't get done well because the team that was delivering it or the leadership that was behind this change perhaps lacked the understanding of a lot of technology solutions that are there. And therefore, I think leadership in these companies that are trying to drive this needs to be exposed to emerging technologies, needs to understand the use cases, needs to really figure out where these technologies have solved problems for them, right? So those are some of the things that we need to do. So step 3 is after blueprinting, you figure your capabilities out. You then get into a pilot. In fact, there is nothing better than testing the solution and your hypothesis upfront. And while this is very easily said, it is very difficult for businesses to believe that they may spend some money and actually lose it because your experiment failed. It's a mindset change, right? And therefore, I would think that fail fast, fail cheap. It's okay to fail now and figure your hypothesis is wrong versus be fixated on the way that you wanted to deliver this experience or the product, and then spend lots of money and then realize later that it's not working, which also depletes you of your cash within that whole program. I would think the next step after that would be to really, really not just think about the experience design. Many companies make the mistake of not figuring out how that experience will actually get delivered through service design. So if you want to be able to deliver, let's say, booking at a click with a counselor or a connect with a counselor, you need to make sure on the other side there are counselors who are willing to take that booking as well, right? So there's an entire different servicing model of how do you build people or how do you build capabilities behind that to be able to deliver that experience, which I think a lot of people miss out. They look at the front experience design but not focusing on the back end, and you end up making this a more costly delivery option than it should be. Finally, I think it's important to push something out there. So I would say pilot, put it out there. That's the next step. And last of all, I think you need to then invest in more complex technologies and making it more complicated. But you need to make sure there's a framework to realize value across the way. So I would think that's broadly the couple of steps that one should be taking in this journey.
Any of the steps in the, I think 5 or 6 steps that you mentioned that you think that companies should definitely over-index on and spend much more time than what they originally intend to?
I think I would actually flip the question. There are some things the company should spend less time on, which is trying to put everything on paper, put a perfect design and say, I need to answer every question before I even get started on this journey. So, traditional companies were used to master plans, 3-year roadmaps, 5-year roadmaps, clarity on exactly what's going to happen. I think today one of the things you need to do less of is plan, but actually focus more on delivering and testing and experimenting, which is a very under-invested thought process, especially with founders and leaders of the company. They always look at teams to say, come back and give me a plan and then I'm going to validate whether the plan is correct. So I'm not saying you shouldn't plan, but don't over plan would be one of the things. The second is definitely don't
stay
build
too
your
rigid to
experience
it.
design. Right. And I think the other thing is don't build your experience design basis what you think is happening, right? And I think there are 3 types of companies I always talk about. There is a company that decides that I'm going to solve a problem that I traditionally solved in a very different way in the non-digital world, and I'm going to be able to reimagine the problem, right? In this case, to give you an example, companies like L'Oreal, Starbucks, These are all companies that are still ultimately giving you your fashion, the stuff that you need to maintain your fashion, or they're going to deliver coffee to you early morning. That need is not changing, right? So they're not co-inventing a new need within you. But there are companies like a Tesla or for that matter, Google couple of years ago, which constantly make you want things that you had never thought of, including Apple, right? So if you're in the business where you're saying that I'm going to create a new need, then there's a very different approach to experience design, because no matter where you go, you will not find people expressing that new need in a very stated manner. Whereas if it's about delivering the same thing in a very, very different and innovative way, then I think your consumers can tell you a lot more about how they actually want it. So, also understanding where you're coming from, and I would say therefore investing in either radically different ideas or investing in actually listening to consumer research and doing a lot around that before you start building your experience.
Okay. So when we're talking about the EAP space, how large is the financial opportunities for EAP providers in India specifically? How is one-to-one help unique in this sector?
So I think one-to-one help has been a very unique thing. Firstly, we are not new. We've been around for 14 plus years, actually 2 decades to be honest, where we started our journey in a small place with a few counselors waiting for people to show up on our door. The opportunity of EAP is actually tremendous, right? I would say not EAP is not just about, there's 1.3 billion Indians, of which at least I would say 30 to 40% of them are working and employed in an institution or with a company. So there are actually a lot of companies out there where employees are working. And today there is the reason that we are going to this through an B2B perspective, wherein we are saying that let the company invest in the well-being of the employee, is because it's far easier to take out the barriers to reach a person when you don't expect that person to start the investment on their own. So as an opportunity, I think there's all of India and the emotional well-being, which is very, very under-penetrated, right? And even today, companies don't realize the value of investing in the emotional well-being of people as a necessary outcome for success of their business. So I think there's still a long way. Secondly, culturally as a country, we were never open to people talking about their problems, people really discussing their emotional stress challenges before. And therefore the opportunity, I think, was very under-penetrated. Now, how are we very unique in this sector? I think we're one of the first EAPs that actually came out of India. So EAP was a more common Western phenomenon where, there are a lot of global players that were playing the role, but India is so different from the West. The therapy of the West will not work in India at all. So I think our unique opportunity that we have is, I think we have 20 years of extremely deep understanding of the stress, anxiety and depression triggers of the Indian workforce. We understand how to address a blue-collared worker in India differently from a techie in India to somebody working in consulting in India or somebody working in a smaller organization in India, right? So I think that is something that I'm very confident we are, very clear about, clearly a big differentiation. The second thing I think is we've also created a very unique opportunity for psychologists across India to find meaningful career progressions within one-to-one help. And what that really means is that we attract some of the best and deepest talent in India in the space. And they have been able to create evidence-based systems. We have got an amazingly robust research-backed content publishing capability. We have a rich assessment framework. But all of this comes from the experience of India, which I think is very different. And we understand how to communicate to this sort of a user base and convince them to start, taking a help. But I think we're still at the beginning of that journey and there's a long way to go.
So, as the Chief Digital Officer, how are you leveraging automation and big data on your platform?
So actually, I've been in multiple big data programs across several companies, including banks and pharmaceuticals. I think big data needs to be small data. And what I mean by that is people have a lot of data that they don't know what to do with it, but the quality of their data is usually questionable, which leads a lot of companies into wild goose chases. So my experience has taught me that it's okay to have small data as long as it's meaningful data. So we are leveraging data, right? It's big or small is questionable, but I think the fact remains that data is at the heart of everything that we do. And today, data is and AI is not about merely looking at recommendation engines or doing something very tactical, which we need to do. I think in the bio and healthcare space, AI is playing a tremendously different role. So there is a lot of research and white papers out there, and in fact, companies that have invested heavily in understanding biomarkers of your body, which are way beyond the blood tests and the traditional tests that most people did. So there is a lot of evidence that your voice actually talks a lot or tells a lot about your state of mind. And there are companies that we are partnering with to try to create some models around that. There are companies that are working on multimodal data models, right? Something around your face recognition plus voice and the typical assessments that we get to figure out how can we actually understand and transcend what is going on. And actually, I think the day is not far in 2, 3, 4 years where you wouldn't go in for a checkup purely looking at signs from your physical body. You will actually start using voice, face, and all of this actively in diagnosing what's going on with you. So that is where I think there's a tremendous opportunity of AI. As far as the data is concerned, we're doing quite a lot to figure out how do we build a platform that is personalized, that gives you tools based on where you come from. So we believe there are 4 contexts that play a role. One is your work context, where you could be a techie in a company, you could be a BPO person in another company, you could be a teller in a bank. Your work conditions come with very different triggers to what you do, and they may cause emotions in you which may be very different. Equally, there is a context of you coming from either a modern family, a traditional family, a city, an urban context, which brings in a different set of cultural nuances that we need to get to understand. And lastly, there is a particular change that is happening in your life depending on the stage of life you are. So there are key events in your life. You could be going through a breakup, you could be thinking about getting married, you could be imagining, deciding whether you want to have a baby or not. And these are all moments where actually your stress starts to manifest. And if not managed well, it is usually results in more constant stress. So we are trying to use our data to understand the right triggers and then bring in the right kind of solutions to you. And that's where data is playing a big role for us.
All right. You talked about talking to people about their triggers, about their stress factors, about their distresses. So, do you maximize impact or profitability? And what have you done to design this trade off?
So I think we came from a point where profitability was certainly not the driver of our growth, right? So even our vision and mission says that we want to have the biggest impact to humankind. We want to be able to touch, emotional well-being for all is really the vision that we have. And when you have such a vision, I think my focus is that if you're solving valuable problems, the profitability will happen. It is a question of making sure there's a balance, that you have enough to keep you going, but you don't get greedy about making money. So I think we're very clear that this company, as our focus, is to impact lives and really, really make a difference in people's lives. But we need to be able to pay the people behind that workforce to be able to continue to doing that. But I don't think our agenda and driver has ever been profitability. It's largely around solving a very important and impactful problem. And I think once you do that, profitability will follow, or investments will also follow, because you're actually solving a very relevant problem.
So it's first and foremost sustenance to carry out a mission, and then out of that, if profitability comes out, it's a addition. It's not something you're aiming towards.
Absolutely. I think for us, it's about being able to invest continuously in innovation.
All right. So talking about you, what made you decide to switch career tracks from technology to mental and emotional wellness?
Well, for people who know me, I've been somebody who constantly keeps changing my tracks. I think I started my,
Okay.
back in college days, we were part of a students exchange program where the exposure to the world gave me a very different outlook, and it made me less fearful about trying different things. And Of course, the founder of that organization, Melted, was actually a VC who influenced me quite closely in my younger days, who said, you must go out and try different things. So even if I look at my career in technology services, I have been one that has tried various roles, be it within Tata or TCS, after which I actually started my own venture for a little bit of time, and then I got back to working with a startup which got acquired into HCL. So it's been a very interesting journey where all through it has actually been entrepreneurship that has driven me. In fact, in my last stint in HCL, I remember being asked to go to Europe 10 years ago to set up our digital and transformation business. And from nothing, we as a group grew to, a good $200-300 million revenue in no time. And the fun was not in actually the growth as much as getting to work on very exciting ideas. One of the reasons that I shifted gears was, I was getting a little bored of the technology services place, largely because I felt they were unable to leverage technology to the most because the problems they were solving were actually bogged down by the various larger enterprises they were catering to. So I actually was supposed to move to head the global digital and consulting teams in the US, but at that point of time, I decided to quit, come back to India, and I'm very passionate about the growth that's happening in India. And I wanted to work on meaningful problems back here, and I experimented with a lot of companies because I felt there was a learning curve for me as well to understand how India works, what the consumers in India want. So I think I spent 1.5 years with different people and different startups till I felt I was ready to look at either my own idea or pick up an idea that was closer to my mind. And I think education and mental health were two very near and dear subjects. And I think my journey at One-to-One Help also started through a consulting gig where I was looking at how to reimagine mental and emotional well-being completely. And I think after that, it's just been a journey where I don't know when I joined them, and it's been a fantastic 1 year at One-to-One Help. And I think to me, the driving force here is my passion to be able to solve a real problem that touches people.
Okay, so as a CXO with multiple responsibilities, how do you switch contexts and still remain productive?
It's actually a tough question, Rahi. And I think the pandemic, so one of the best things is I joined this company completely remote, right? And I had to suddenly come in and lead a company where people didn't really know me, where the founders have been here for about 20 years and built trust. So, and you're right, I think being the CEO or DO, which is the Chief Digital and Operating Officers, you typically have 25 agendas in a day that all need equal amount of attention. But what helps me typically get productive is one, having discipline in my routine. So I'm very clear when I start meetings, when I try to end meetings, and I make sure that I apportion time in a very systematic fashion to all elements. And I have put priorities saying that new and innovation needs 30 to 40% of my attention. Keeping the lights on needs, X, building a team needs Y, and that priority changes because I think when I came in, it was about getting to understand the ops, understanding where I spent most of my time because that was valuable. Then I think there was a large amount of time where I'm spending time now building the team and actually hiring quite a lot, which is actually quite a bit of an effort on its own. And then there is how much you're going to spend on growth, how much you're going to spend. So you need to put in some framework for your own self and be disciplined about cutting off at that point. And I think the third thing is create teams that can actually help you scale. And that is one of the hardest things to do today. But I think if you have a trusted team behind you, then you can trust them to deliver and do the right thing. And I usually give them a framework to operate in, saying these are the 20 ways that I make my decision. As long as you're within those 20 means of those 20 decision trees, you're fine. And people will make mistakes and you'll have to let that happen. But prioritization is hard, and in all of this you need to find space to make sure you get a personal recharge, because one of the learnings from my previous stint was my Saturdays, Sundays, I think I used to have a 1 week 20 different city travel schedule, and I never got enough time to take care of myself. But now I've kind of put that structure in that the weekends I do try to switch off and not do anything, and that space actually gives you room for imagination. Otherwise, I think at some point you'll get choked just going through the clockwork.
You end up becoming like a machine.
Right.
No, on that note, thank you so much, Meeta, for giving us your insights and also teaching us the importance of making a schedule and inserting self time for yourself in your schedule and in your framework, and for all the other insights you've given us. Thank you so much, Meeta.
Thank you, Rahi. It was a pleasure being here, and I'm hoping that each one of the audience is taking care of their emotional well-being, and tugging along with this pandemic despite all the changes.